This is Today As It Happened. Good Tuesday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From President Trump's visit with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to the ongoing impact of the federal government shutdown. But first, this morning our correspondent in Tel Aviv gave us a look back at 2 devastating years of war between Israel and Hamas. We continue to follow the events across Israel this morning as today marks 2 years since Hamas militants stormed into southern Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking more than 200 hostages. Thousands of Israelis gathered at memorial sites today, including the Nova Music Festival, where almost 400 people died. Scripps News international correspondent Blake Sifton is in Tel Aviv for us. And Blake, how is the second anniversary of those October 7th attacks and the beginning of the war there? How's it being felt by Israelis and Palestinians alike?
Good morning, Holly. Because these talks are underway, and for the first time, an end to the war could be on the horizon, while there's sadness, there's also a great deal of hope. However, it's mixed with anxiety. We, of course, have had 2 ceasefires that have broken down in the past and the war renewed, and we've had multiple rounds of ceasefire talks that looked hopeful, and a deal appeared to be in sight, only for it to evaporate. Now, in addition to that, most people, when you speak to them, honestly can't believe that 2 years on, the war is still raging. I was here on October 7th, and I woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the first rocket sirens, and I stood on this balcony, and I watched the rockets being intercepted over Tel Aviv. And at the time, I never could have imagined that 2 years on, the war would still be raging. Now, of course, in Gaza, local health officials say 67,000 people have been killed, including 18,000 children. Everyone in Gaza knows multiple people who have died in this war. Most people have been displaced many times, multiple times. And many people are, of course, now living in tents. And neighborhoods that people knew, entire neighborhoods, have now been reduced to rubble. In Israel, the memory and the experience of October 7th is very much an open wound, and many people say that it won't heal until all remaining hostages are brought back from Gaza. Of course, we also need to remember that this is the longest war Israel has ever fought, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers and reservists have served hundreds of days in both Gaza and Lebanon. There's widespread reports of burnout, of PTSD, and there has been increasing rates of suicide amongst soldiers and reservists. Israelis are also well aware of how diplomatically isolated they've become and how badly their reputation has been damaged internationally. And politically, they are very divided. A poll was released just the other day in which 64% of Israelis said that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should take responsibility for the failures that led to October 7th and should resign. But of course, he does still enjoy substantial support amongst many in Israel.
And Blake, I want to turn to those talks as they continue in Egypt. Is there any sign of progress at those talks? And what are the challenges they're facing at this point, just day 2?
Well, the first day of the talks yesterday, we're told, ended on a positive note. We understand that mediators have had the negotiators from Hamas and from Israel work on a roadmap for how these talks can progress. And we understand that the second day of the talks is underway now in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, obviously, President Trump has expressed quite a bit of enthusiasm and optimism about the likelihood of a deal happening. And we understand that the negotiators are working really on the cessation of hostilities, on the logistics of a ceasefire, because that's the first thing that needs to happen before anything else can move forward. And they're also talking about the names of the Palestinian prisoners who would be released for Israeli hostages. This, according to the proposal, is the release of some 250 security prisoners that are serving life sentences in Israeli jails that would be released. Now, Hamas reportedly wants high-profile prisoners. They want the kind of prisoners that Israel believes are the most notorious and that Israel is the most reluctant to release. So that is a major obstacle to overcome. Also, the withdrawal of Israeli forces ahead of this exchange of hostages for prisoners is another major issue. Hamas is apparently pushing for Israeli forces to withdraw to the lines they held in January during the last ceasefire, when they did not hold most Palestinian population centers. But according to the proposal as it's written, Israel would remain in the lines they held until August, where they were in control of most Palestinian population centers. And of course, the other major issue, really the elephant in the room, is the issue of Hamas disarming and Gaza being demilitarized. When Hamas sent their response to President Trump's proposal, a response that was viewed as positive and that led President Trump to say Hamas was ready for peace, they made no mention of disarming. And that has been a red line for them. And other than the hostages, it's Israel's other major demand. So that is a major stumbling block to be overcome.
All right, Scripps News international correspondent Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv with that update. Thank you, Blake. Coming up on Today as It Happened.
Our federal surges in Washington, D.C. and Memphis are a perfect example of how the Department of Justice should operate.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
There's been public reporting that Jeffrey Epstein showed people photos of President Trump with half-naked young women. Do you know if the FBI found those photographs in their search of Jeffrey Epstein's safe or premises or otherwise? Have you seen any such thing?
You know, Senator Whitehouse, you sit here and make salacious remarks, once again trying to slander President Trump left and right, when you're the one who was taking money from one of Epstein's closest confidants, I believe, I could be wrong, correct me, Reid Hoffman, who was with Jeffrey Epstein on multiple occasions. And the senator sitting right next to you tried to block the flight logs from being released. Yet you're grilling me on President Trump and some photograph with Epstein?
Attorney General Pam Bondi facing tough questions from Democrats during a heated congressional hearing today. Lawmakers have accused her of weaponizing the Justice Department to target President Trump's political enemies. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is live on Capitol Hill with us, tracking today's hearing. Nate, for those of us who are catching up right now, maybe just tuning in, what have the biggest points been made during this hearing, and how confrontational have things been?
Look, quite confrontational, and I mean that was kind of the moniker that this hearing is. You know, the judiciary hearings are typically fairly confrontational. This one proving to be no exception right off the top. The top Democrat of that committee, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, the ranking member, getting into it with Pam Bondi, making clear, asking questions about the Trump administration's decisions in recent days, immigration raids, the deployment of troops, and the National Guard to various American cities, especially blue cities, and they had a kind of pretty fiery exchange within the first 10 or so minutes of this hearing. Take a listen.
The word is, and I think it's been confirmed by the White House, they are going to transfer Texas National Guard units to the state of Illinois. What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, Chairman, as you shut down the government, you voted to shut down the government, and you're sitting here, our law enforcement officers aren't being paid. They're out there working to protect you. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And currently, the National Guard are on the way to Chicago. If you're not going to protect your citizens, President Trump will.
I've been on this committee for more than 20 years. That's the kind of testimony you expect from this administration. A simple question as to whether or not they had a legal rationale for deploying National Guard troops becomes grounds for a personal attack.
And look, Democrats have been focusing on what they view as, abuse of power by the Trump administration, the decision to send those National Guard into Democratic-run cities, especially when the governors have expressly said they don't want the National Guard there, the ongoing legal battles that are playing out. This hearing hasn't been particularly revelatory in terms of what the Attorney General has told the hearing, but again, that is mostly for when Democrats are speaking and having their opportunity to ask questions of Attorney General Bondi, and she has gotten fiery with several members with personal attacks, similar to what we saw a couple weeks ago with the FBI Director Kash Patel. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what Republicans have been focusing on. Now, yesterday, the Senate Judiciary Committee releasing a report, an interim report, that multiple U.S. senators and one representative's phone records were subpoenaed from phone companies during January 6th related investigation, some of them involved in the false elector plots up here on Capitol Hill to try and certify the election in favor of President Donald Trump, who was serving at that time, instead of the rightful winner, President Joe Biden. Ultimately, Republicans, fired up about that today. They've been asking Attorney General Bondi about that. They've been talking about weaponization of, or at least what they view as weaponization of the Department of Justice, going back to the Merrick Garland years, the Biden administration, the 2016 Steele dossier, and the allegation that President Trump, then a candidate for president of the United States, was under the influence of Russia. Again, these are kind of all allegations that we've heard in the past. At this point, the Attorney General kind of siding with some of these Republicans, saying that they're conducting these investigations, but again, not offering a whole lot of details. So again, Maritza, kind of in all, this hearing as partisan as ever, both sides kind of playing up their narratives. Democrats also talking about the Epstein files. Attorney General Bondi making clear with almost every Democrat who's gone so far that she is opposed to this government shutdown, blaming Democrats for shutting down the government to appeal to their base.
Yeah, I think spicy indeed is a good word for it. So let's get to that ongoing government shutdown. We have been talking and like we said, playing the broken record for days and days and days. But you had an interesting post on X last night, Nate. So where are we with any kind of progress over bipartisan negotiations?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about whether those negotiations are actually happening, if there's anything that Republicans can give Democrats to kind of guarantee them that the Affordable Care Act subsidies that Democrats have been pushing for will be addressed. And I just want to note that there are some unlikely bedfellows here. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican from Georgia, putting up a post on X last night, kind of eyebrow raising. It was fairly long, but I want to quote a key part of it here. She says, quote, "I'm going to go against everyone on the issue because when the tax credits expire this year, my own adult children's insurance premiums are going to double for 2026, along with all the wonderful families and hardworking people in my district. Not a single Republican in leadership talked to us about this or has given us a plan to help Americans deal with their health insurance premiums doubling." Now, again, Congresswoman Greene kind of on her own here, separate from the main line from the Republican Party and from House Speaker Mike Johnson, who's often said that, look, they can address some of these subsidies expiring, but they want to do so once the government is reopened. So kind of interesting to hear that there. But there was a new memo that was circulated this morning from the Office of Management and Budget. Scripps News has obtained that memo. What it says is that the Trump administration is actively considering not giving some of these federal employees who are either furloughed or forced to work without pay back pay once the shutdown ends. Now, there was a law passed in 2019 requiring that they receive back pay. At this point, the Trump administration making the argument that back pay might not be necessary. I caught up with Republican Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina for his reaction to that latest memo. OMB has put out a memo saying that the administration does not necessarily have to pay government employees after a shutdown ends. What's your take?
I know there's a lot of hardworking people that are at home right now or not working because the Democrats refuse to continue the current spending levels. That's all we ask that they do. I believe it's a strategic mistake to now let those folks know or let them think that they could potentially not get back pay. If I were them, I'd start looking for another job. And there's a lot of good, hardworking people out there. I don't think that is helpful discussion right now. Let's get out of the shutdown. Let's negotiate the premium tax credits and not threaten or use this as a lever to actually create fear and uncertainty for people who are not making a paycheck in the next pay period, getting a paycheck in the next pay period.
So there's a lot of questions about whether that's a negotiating tactic on the part of the White House to try and get Democrats to the table, to get them to support an end to this government shutdown for their votes for this House-passed Republican funding plan to reopen the government. Again, not exactly clear if this is a negotiating tactic, but the Trump administration floating the idea of layoffs, other ways to try and bring Democrats to the table here to end this shutdown, to get out of this shutdown, and then to move on to other issues, which Republicans say include those Affordable Care Act tax credits, which expire at the end of this year. So a lot of questions about how things end here, whether there's any sort of deal to be had. Just after that conversation, Senator Tillis telling us he does not see a way out to this government shutdown this week. A lot of questions about what kind of bipartisan off-ramp could happen at this point to end this shutdown, and whether the Trump administration is willing to pay back pay to these federal employees, or if this is just another legal fight that is likely going to have to be had.
Up next on Today's It Happened.
We have natural conflict. We also have mutual love. You know, we have great love for each other. I love this. I love Canada.
watching Today's It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's get to it.
It started a little more than a decade ago when states began to implement conversion therapy bans across the U.S. Conversion therapy restrictions essentially limit what young LGBTQ+ youth can be exposed to during counseling sessions. They have been praised by many, criticized by others, and on Tuesday the issue was front and center before the Supreme Court. Let's start with how many states have conversion therapy bans. This is a map by the Movement Advancement Project. All those states in dark green, 23 in total, have laws preventing therapists from trying to change the gender identity or sexual orientation of clients under age 18. One of those states is Colorado, which is at the heart of Tuesday's Supreme Court oral arguments.
I'm only allowed to help them go through the process of change in one way.
Kaylee Childs is the Colorado counselor challenging the law. In a video posted by her legal team, Childs would like to see Colorado's conversion therapy ban overturned, claiming that therapists are too restricted in how they can treat patients. Others disagree. The American Medical Association advocates against conversion therapy, saying in recent policy documents, quote, "These practices may cause significant psychological distress." Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser defended Colorado's law in an interview with the Scripps News Group in Denver earlier this year.
We're banning this practice because it's harming kids, it doesn't do anything of value, and we want to protect people.
On paper, the Supreme Court does have a 6-3 conservative majority, but that doesn't necessarily mean the High Court will decide a certain way.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's an honor to have the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who I have made very popular. He's an extremely popular Prime Minister, and I'm very honored to do it because I liked him. Right from the beginning, I've liked him, and we've had a good relationship. We have some natural conflict, but we will probably work that out. But we've had a very strong relationship.
Today, President Trump hosting Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House for a bilateral meeting between the two nations. This is the second bilateral meeting between the U.S. and Canada since both Trump and Carney took office this year. And it comes as the president has implemented a host of trade barriers on one of America's closest allies, including some of the highest tariff rates in the world. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us live now from the White House with the latest. Stephanie, great to see you, my friend. The Trump administration has placed some of these harshest tariffs in the world on Canada. So what can you tell us about any potential deals or lowering of those rates?
Hey, Maritza, good afternoon. Well, President Trump didn't really answer or give any specifics on what it might take to reduce some of these tariffs that Canada is facing, but it certainly seemed like both leaders have an appetite to strike some kind of deal. Are we going to get any specifics after this meeting today? The mood around here, not necessarily high and thinking that's especially likely, but certainly it is arguably the biggest thing on the table that these two leaders are going to be discussing. Part of the problem, as President Trump put it, in trying to strike a trade deal was what the president called natural conflicts, basically both countries wanting to be competitive in similar industries. And that's part of what's making these trade talks take so long. Take a listen.
You can compete and you can do. We don't like to compete because we sort of hurt each other when we compete. And so we have a natural conflict. It's a natural business conflict, nothing wrong with it. And I think we've come a long way over the last few months, actually, in terms of that relationship. It's a tough situation because we want to make our cars here. At the same time, we want Canada to do well making cars. So we're working on formulas, and I think we'll get there.
While President Trump called it a natural conflict, Canadian Prime Minister Carney didn't really want to use the word conflict, but says there are definitely areas where the two countries compete and that it's important to strike some kind of agreement that lowers the tariffs. Now, I want to take a look at where the tariffs are for Canadian goods coming into the U.S. right now. There are a lot. They vary. Main 35% tariff on any export that's not covered by the USMCA. That's that free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. There's a 50% tariff still on steel and aluminum. There's 25% coming on medium and heavy trucks that we heard the president talk about and post on his Truth Social. for Canada's part, for the reciprocal tariffs, Canada only has one reciprocal tariff for the U.S., and that's a 25% tariff on U.S. steel, aluminum, and automobiles. So trade clearly a top issue on the meeting today, Maritza, but the leaders are expected to touch on a potential peace deal between Hamas and Israel, something that Canada has supported the efforts that President Trump and his administration have been undergoing there. Probably Ukraine and Russia also coming up on the agenda between the two leaders today. We're not going to see a press conference between the two of them, which we will sometimes see when we have these bilateral meetings. So that Oval Office spray before the meeting that the press pool was allowed to be in, that might be the only comments we get from both of the two leaders on camera today. So we'll have to wait and see what type of readout, what type of recap we're able to get from the White House press team, and then also keeping our eyes on the Canadian press team for the Prime Minister to see if we can get some info there on any type of deal the two leaders might be able to strike in their meeting today.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the idea of a 51st state also comes up again. Stephanie Liebergen joining us from the White House this afternoon. Thank you so much, Steph.
You're watching Today As It Happened. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your daily rundown of today's top stories.
President Donald Trump says he's considering invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy troops in U.S. cities after courts blocked his National Guard deployments. Now, this 1807 law gives presidents emergency power to use military force on American soil. Now, the president described Portland as experiencing what he calls criminal insurrection. Meanwhile, investigators in South Carolina say they have not found any evidence a fire at a state judge's house was set intentionally. The blaze on Saturday nearly destroyed Judge Diane Goodstein's Edisto Island property. 3 people who were in the house at the time had to jump from the elevated home to escape the flames. One person was airlifted to a hospital. Goodstein has been a state judge for 27 years. Today, October 7th, marks 2 years since Hamas militants stormed into southern Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking more than 200 hostage. Thousands of Israelis gathered at memorial sites today, including the site of the Nova Music Festival, where almost 400 people were killed. And today we heard from relatives of some of the people who were or are currently being held hostage after those October 7th attacks. Scripps News White House correspondent Jacob Gardenswartz is live now outside the Kennedy Center in our nation's capital, where those loved ones just spoke. So, Jacob,
a lot of police.
It was only the next day when she went to clean the ambulance that what she had experienced hit her.
Open the ambulance. It was horrible, terrible. What we didn't imagine that we were there yesterday.
2 years later, she still faces active denial about what happened that day.
I saw that. Nobody can take it from me. Nobody. I was there. I saw that. I saw the injured people and the body, and nobody can tell me that it's not true.
But she says the outside noise has united the nation and given her a deeper faith in her people.
We will never fall down. We're very, very strong.
It's hard to imagine everything she's seen, Alex. And while we are seeing memorials going on really around the world, we are also seeing protests. So how are city officials preparing in New York where you are?
Well, we are expecting protests all over the city. One group putting out a map of Manhattan and posting Jewish organizations all over the city, as well as Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is Jewish, his home location. So we are expecting protests all over the city today. NYPD says there's no credible threats and that they have ramped up security. But there has been pushback from hostage families who are asking for a day of mourning, and from leaders all over the world. There are protests all over Europe today as well, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer from the UK has said that it's un-British to protest on a day like this, but those who are participating in the protests say that they are doing it to draw attention to the humanitarian issues in Gaza.
All right, Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller live in New York for us. Thanks so much, Alex.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
The impact of the government shutdown now rippling through airports. Coming up, what staffing shortages could mean for your next flight.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Okay, let's jump right back into our rundown of the top stories of the day.
Illinois officials say they do not want National Guard troops helping them with law enforcement, but Texas Governor Greg Abbott is still sending 400 of his state guards there anyway. Abbott shared this photo on X, but did not say where they were headed. A judge ruled yesterday that the Trump administration has 2 days to respond to a restraining order request by Illinois, which would stop the Trump administration from deploying the Guard. Now, President Trump says he's willing to invoke the Insurrection Act if necessary here. That allows the president to activate military in states regardless if they want his help or not. Switching to some health news, artificially sweetened drinks might not be doing your liver any favors. This is according to a major study out Monday, and it linked both artificially sweetened and sugary drinks with an increased risk of liver disease. Now, the study looked at more than 100,000 participants to examine risks of liver disease, liver fat accumulation, and liver-related mortality. Now, both categories of drinks were associated with higher risks of liver disease, but the artificially sweetened drinks had a stronger association of liver-related death. Impacts of the shutdown were quite visible yesterday and into today. We've been telling you about what happened in the last shutdown, that TSA workers and air traffic controllers were calling out. That's because they were required to work, but were not getting their paychecks as scheduled, and that is where we are again now. The government shutdown rippling through airports across the country. Flights at several major airports delayed Monday because of air traffic controllers' staffing shortages.
We're sitting on the plane, we're ready to take off, and the pilot starts announcing 10-minute delay, 15-minute delay, 20-minute delay, and said that it was ultimately a result of the current government shutdown.
Air traffic controllers and TSA employees are considered essential workers, so they're working without pay. But Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says there's been an uptick in the number of air traffic controllers calling in sick.
If we have additional sick calls, we will reduce the flow consistent with a rate that's safe for the American people.
Duffy acknowledging the shutdown makes an already stressful job more challenging for air traffic controllers.
They're not just now thinking about the airspace and the jobs they have to do in these towers or TRACONs or centers across the country. they're thinking about, am I going to get a paycheck?
On Monday, more than 6,000 U.S. flights were delayed, according to FlightAware. As of midday Tuesday, more than 1,600 U.S. flights were delayed. Delays could worsen if the shutdown drags on, with the U.S. already experiencing a shortage of air traffic controllers ahead of the government work stoppage. The union representing those workers calling on lawmakers to end the shutdown immediately.
We do not have time to waste on the unnecessary distractions created by this shutdown. So our message is clear. In the shutdown.
So as we've said, this was also a major issue during the last government shutdown, and it helped lead to its eventual end in 2019. Now, lawmakers reached a deal shortly after the FAA limited flights at several major airports because of staffing issues.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
3 weeks ago, you had the Arab League, along with the Muslim states, publicly state that there is no room for Hamas in a post-war future. That is an extraordinary development.
Welcome back to Scripps News. Israel and Hamas say they are considering President Donald Trump's peace plan. They've been at war for 2 years officially today, after, on this day 2 years ago, Hamas launched a brazen attack in Israel. Since then, tens of thousands of people have been killed. Palestinians have been displaced. Hamas has held on to 48 hostages. 20 are believed to be alive still. Now, a relative of a hostage says she's on edge about a potential peace deal.
I think by now we've kind of learned to be really cautious. I'm not sure that I can call it cautious optimism. I think we are just kind of on edge, waiting to see what happens, and we're hoping. More than being optimistic, we are really hoping that this is finally going to be the end. We are people who have been traumatized and have been suffering for 2 years now, and the only thing we've ever wanted since day one has been the return of our family members.
Now, CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, Ron Halber, is with me now. Ron, thank you for joining us. Hearing that young woman, is that how you feel? You're welcome. Is that how you feel? Do you feel on edge about this?
Yes. I went to an event today at the Kennedy Center in Washington where we heard from several people, some who had lost, some former hostages who had been held in captivity for as much as 450 days, others of relatives who are trying to get the bodies of their relatives back, and those who are trying to get back their live relatives. I think we have the greatest chance now than we've ever had to get them home, and I am cautiously optimistic that this will result in bringing the hostages home.
As you know, Ron, the pain of this war has been felt on both sides, and I want to play a piece of sound from a couple of Gazans.
Almost 2 years of war, about 17 hours a day of shelling every day with displacement and starvation. Bitter hours that we endured with great difficulty. One cannot imagine the scale of the hardship.
I do not understand politics, but I honestly have to say about handing over the weapons that what we have endured hasn't been easy. Please end the war and hand over the weapons to anyone. Bring anyone from outside to govern us. We have children who are dying of hunger, and no one feels for them.
So you hear that man pleading for Hamas to hand over the weapons, bring anybody else in to govern us. And as we've talked about with so many conflicts, people are not their governments. So do you think there's room for the people in both Israel and Gaza to demand these leaders end this and do what it takes to come to this peace agreement?
Yeah, I think you have an unusual set of circumstances. For the first time since the war began, first of all, 3 weeks ago, you had the Arab League, along with the Muslim states, publicly state that there is no room for Hamas in a post-war future. That is an extraordinary development of acceptance of Israel in the region and the fact that Hamas is the culprit that has brought devastation upon their own people. I mean, today on October 7th, there are
20, what we assume are 20 live hostages who are sitting 150 feet below ground, deprived of oxygen, food, being tormented, abused psychologically and physically. And today for the Jewish community, it's horrible. But I also hear the words of that man. Too many Palestinian civilians have died in this conflict. And I'm not saying that, that Israel has not made mistakes or military errors, but everybody has to remember that 2 years ago, when Hamas killed 1,200 people, gang raped women, babies' heads were chopped off, and men were massacred on October 7th, there was no war on October 6th. And that is what brought the Israeli retaliation and the Israeli desire to bring an end to the perpetrators. Now, you could say they may have gone a bit too far in some areas, but this is a justifiable war. But also, I acknowledge the tens of thousands of suffering Palestinians who are being used by Hamas as a shield. Hamas is very unpopular now. After 2 years, Gazans don't want Hamas. They don't want the suffering they've brought upon them. And my prayer is that the peace talks in Egypt will be successful so both Israelis and Palestinians can have a better future.
Yeah, and I think you make some really excellent points there. What does long-lasting peace look like for the Jewish community?
Well, in Israel or in the around the world it would be, for the Jewish community, would be seeing anti-Semitism decrease. We know that for the first time, half of the anti-Semitic incidents in the United States are being linked to sort of a revenge against Israel's actions abroad. And I'd like to see an end of Israel's diplomatic isolation. We are years away from a Palestinian state. I do not believe that the Canadians, the French, and the English did anything to help the Palestinians by saying there's going to be a Palestinian state. What you need to do is convince the Israelis. And after October 7th, more Israelis are against a Palestinian state ever than before because they feel they had their own state from 2005 to when Israel pulled out. And instead of turning it into an area where they could build civic institutions and industry and culture, they turned it into a launching pad of missiles against Israel. And Israel has fought about 4 or 5 mini wars with Hamas since. So the key is going to have to be the Palestinian people ridding themselves of a culture of hate that is bent upon revenge and the acceptance of Israel as a legitimate, organic part of the Middle East. It all starts there. Egypt and Jordan and all the other states have accepted the reality of the existence of the state of Israel, that it's a living, breathing country with as much right to be there as they do, and that's the first step.
I'm Holly Furfer. We hope you have a great Tuesday night.